Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're wading into the shadows of history's most iconic supernatural stories. You know, the ones screaming phantoms, furniture flying across the room, headless monks.
Uh-huh.
But our mission today is to, well, ignore all of that. We're going to be looking purely at the evidence, the facts behind the folklore.
Exactly. And when you actually dig into the sources, the investigative reports, a pattern emerges that's shockingly consistent. We're cutting right past the myths to the scientific and, well, often the scandalous reasons these stories stick around.
And the sources point to one core finding that really flips the whole script.
They do. The finding is this. The more famous a haunting is, the higher the probability, we're talking something like 99%, that the cause is completely mundane.
99%.
It almost always traces back to one of three things: environmental factors,
Yeah.
deep psychological issues, or, and this is the big one, just conscious, deliberate deception for money. So today we're giving you a shortcut to understanding that 99%.
Okay, let's start with that last one because it feels like the most shocking. Pure financially motivated fraud.
It's cynical, but it's where so many of these huge stories begin. The really dramatic hauntings, the ones that become books and blockbuster movies, they're often just inventions.
So give us the biggest one, the case that basically defined the genre for a whole generation.
Oh, that has to be the Amityville Horror. The story from 1974 with the Lutz family. It had everything.
Green slime, pig eyes in the window, levitating beds.
All of it. Classic demonic stuff. But the entire case was, well, it was completely discredited.
How did it actually fall apart?
The people involved admitted it. It came out that George and Kathy Lutz, along with their lawyer, William Weber, basically invented the whole story over several bottles of wine.
You're kidding.
Nope. Weber went on the record. He confirmed they made up the details specifically to get a huge book deal and then the movie deal. And the proof is, well, the minute the Lutz family moved out, nothing happened.
Nothing.
Zero. Subsequent residents, police, neighbors. They all reported that the house was perfectly normal. It wasn't a haunting. It was a really successful business plan.
Wow. A marketing campaign pretending to be a paranormal event.
Yeah.
And this profit motive, it even infects these historic places, right? The ones that claim to have centuries of dark energy.
Absolutely. A perfect example is the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana. Their most famous story is about a slave named Chloe, who supposedly poisoned the family and now haunts the grounds.
I've heard that one. It's a huge tourist draw.
It is. But there's zero historical evidence for it. No records of a Chloe, no record of the murders as described. The whole story was fabricated by tour guides in the 1990s.
The 90s.
Yeah, just to make the tours more exciting. It's modern fiction sold as history.
And this pattern just keeps repeating, even in more modern cases.
All the time. Look at the Cage in England, a former witch prison. It got famous in the late 2000s for, demonic activity.
Okay.
But the owner later admitted she invented a lot of it for media attention, while the sources show she was dealing with some very severe psychological problems and drug use. The keeper of the ancient Ram Inn, another famous one, even said he exaggerated things to keep the business going. The common thread is always the money.
It's a pretty sobering thought. The ghost you're paying to see might just be a dollar sign.
Precisely. But let's move on from just straight-up lying, because the next category is, I think, even more fascinating: environmental causes.
Okay.
We're talking about real, physical things in a house that can mess with your brain and make you think you're being haunted.
And the number one suspect for historical hauntings isn't a demon at all. It's a gas.
It's carbon monoxide, CO. It is the perfect ghost. It's odorless, it's colorless, you don't know it's there.
And the symptoms, they sound a lot like a classic haunting.
They're a perfect match. If you have slow, low-level CO poisoning from, say, a bad furnace or a blocked flue common in old houses, you get pulsing headaches, fatigue, nausea, confusion. But here's the kicker. As it gets worse, you get extreme irritability, aggression, and visual disturbances.
Visual disturbances, that's the key.
It is. Your brain isn't getting enough oxygen, so you start seeing things in your peripheral vision.
Yeah.
Movement, shadows. It creates that classic, overwhelming feeling that you're being watched.
So many of these old stories with the headaches and the paranoia, it could have just been a faulty chimney.
It was very often a faulty chimney. The ghost was just hypoxia.
That's incredible. But what about the other physical stuff? The noises, the feeling of pressure in a room?
That brings us to another environmental culprit: infrasound. This is sound at a frequency below 20 hertz, which is too low for you to actually hear.
So what generates it?
It can be anything from wind blowing over the roof in a certain way to old plumbing or machinery. And because you can't hear it, your body just registers it as a weird vibration, a pressure.
And that feeling makes us anxious.
Deeply anxious. It's been shown to cause panic, discomfort, and it can even vibrate your eyeballs just enough to create optical illusions. That's your shimmering shadow in the corner.
So a creaky old house is basically a perfect machine for generating anxiety.
Exactly. And if you add in fluctuating electromagnetic fields from bad wiring, which can affect the brain's temporal lobe, your fear center, you have a recipe for a haunting.
So a short circuit could literally trigger a feeling of terror.
It absolutely can. This combination, the CO, the infrasound, the EMFs, that was pretty much the final explanation for the famous Borley Rectory.
Ah, the most haunted house in England.
Right. The knocking sounds were traced to water pipes. The ghostly whispers were just drafts. And then, of course, the main investigator, Harry Price, was caught faking evidence. Once you account for all that, the ghost just vanishes.
Your house doesn't need an exorcist, it needs an engineer.
And a CO detector.
Which brings us to the most complex haunting ground of all, the human mind itself. Let's talk about the psychology that makes us see ghosts, even when the house is perfectly fine.
Well, the brain is, at its core, a pattern recognition machine. And sometimes it takes shortcuts. The most common one is called pareidolia.
That's seeing faces and things, right?
Seeing faces in clouds, figures in shadows, hearing voices in static. Our brain is hardwired to find human-like patterns in random noise. That dark shape in the hallway isn't a ghost. It's just your brain doing what it's supposed to do with ambiguous information.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the really terrifying experiences, like being held down in your bed?
That is almost always sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
It's a totally normal neurological event. It's when your brain wakes up before your body does.
So you're conscious, but you can't move.
You're temporarily frozen. And because part of your brain is still in a dream state, you hallucinate. That creates the classic demon on the chest feeling. It feels terrifyingly real, but it's just a little glitch in brain chemistry as you wake up.
And sometimes just the act of grieving can make you feel a presence.
Yes, grief hallucinations. Our sources show up to 60% of people who've lost a loved one will briefly hear their voice or feel their touch. It's a completely normal part of bereavement, not a spirit.
But what about when it's not just one person? When a whole family or a whole town experiences something?
Then you're often looking at a social phenomena, like mass hysteria. The Bell Witch case in Tennessee from the early 1800s is a great example.
The family was tormented by this invisible entity.
Especially the daughter, Betsy Bell. But modern analysis points to a mix of things. Intense psychological suggestion within the family, and maybe even poisoning from arsenic or mercury, which were in medicines back then. Betsy also had what we now call conversion symptoms, real physical problems like seizures brought on by extreme psychological stress.
So the emotional pressure created the witch.
In a way, yes.
Hmm.
And that same idea, internal distress creating an external story, explains the Winchester Mystery House.
The house that was under construction for 38 years.
Exactly. Sarah Winchester wasn't building it for ghosts. She was building it because she was consumed by grief for her husband and child and had a deep belief in spiritism. The bizarre architecture was a reflection of her own internal turmoil.
The ghost is so often just human trauma projected onto a building.
It is. Even the legend of 50 Berkeley Square in London, where people supposedly died from fright. The truth is just tragic.
What was it?
The source of the terrifying screams wasn't a ghost. It was the owner's mentally ill brother who was kept locked in an upstairs room. The story of a deadly specter was just invented years later in a cheap novel.
That might be the saddest explanation of all.
Which leads us to poltergeists, the noisy ghosts.
Right, the ones that throw things.
Yes. And this specific category actually has the highest rate of rational explanation.
How high are we talking?
Our sources say between 95 and 98% of well-investigated poltergeist cases are completely explained. And the culprit is almost always a single person in the house.
And usually a young person, right? An adolescent.
Almost always. A
Well,
teenager, often a girl, going through some kind of emotional stress. This is so common that parapsychologists have pretty much dropped the old term recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis.
What do they call it now?
They're more likely to call it living agent fraud or misdirection. The idea is the phenomena centers on a living person, and it stops when they leave.
And the Enfield poltergeist in London is the textbook example of this.
The most famous one. Over 2,000 events recorded, flying furniture, you name it. But it turned out the two young daughters were behind most of it.
They faked it.
They did. They used hidden strings, photo tricks, really clever misdirection. One of the girls later admitted that maybe 2% of it was real. The rest was just them.
But what about cases with, like, scientific instruments? I'm thinking of the Rosenheim poltergeist in Germany.
That one was compelling. Physicists were there measuring huge electrical spikes, lights were swinging, phones were ringing off the hook.
So what was it?
It was the 19-year-old secretary, Annemarie Schaberl. After a ton of investigation, they caught her manipulating things. And the key piece of evidence, the moment she was fired, all the activity stopped. Permanently.
And even video isn't foolproof.
Not at all. The Columbus poltergeist in '84 had that famous clip of a chair flying across the room.
I remember that. It looked real.
At normal speed, yes. But in slow motion, you can clearly see the 14-year-old girl, Tina Resch, throwing the chair herself the instant the camera's attention is diverted. It's a magic trick.
It seems like the motives behind these hauntings are so complex. Everything from profit to, well, just a cry for help.
To really see how tangled these non-paranormal causes can be, we should look at a historical case. The Melchior Joller house in Switzerland back in 1862.
And Joller was a skeptic, which is what makes his account so interesting.
He was a politician, a liberal, and he documented everything meticulously. Severe poltergeist activity, doors and windows smashing, furniture being tossed around, stones falling from the ceiling without hitting anyone.
Yeah.
He was completely convinced it was real.
But what was going on in his life at the time?
He was under unbelievable stress, he was drowning in debt, and he was being attacked politically. So there are a couple of theories. One expert theory is that it was a deliberate, malicious plot. That Joller's main creditor secretly planted someone in the house to act as a poltergeist and literally scare him out so the creditor could seize the property.
That's like a Victorian thriller.
It shows you how far human motive can go. But another theory is that even if he wasn't targeted, Joller's own extreme stress was the trigger. That pressure, combined with, say, an adolescent in the house, unconsciously created the phenomena.
An unconscious projection of his anxiety.
Exactly. Either way, the end result was the same. Joller fled the house, moved away, and died a few years later, a broken man.
And what's the final piece of earthly proof that the problem wasn't the house itself?
It's what the official investigators did. They followed the #1 rule for these cases. They removed the Joller family. They put a police officer in the empty house for 3 days.
Yeah.
And nothing happened. Not a single knock. The house was quiet. The spook was tied to the people.
This has been quite a journey, from ghosts to gas lines and human drama. It's either really comforting or maybe a little disappointing to know that almost every famous haunting has a very earthly answer.
I think it should be comforting. It means we're more in control than we think. The fact is, after more than a century of serious paranormal research, there is still zero reproducible scientific proof of ghosts.
So what's the real phenomenon we should be looking at?
The real phenomenon is that 40 to 50% of people still believe in them or believe they've had an experience. That belief is what's powerful. It's kept alive by our culture, by the media, and by our own brains, which can be easily tricked by the environment or our emotions.
So the final thought for you to take away is this. Next time you feel that sudden chill or hear a weird knock in the night, maybe ask yourself a different question. Is it a spirit trying to break through from the other side? Or is it just time to check the batteries in your CO detector?
Always check the CO detector first.
We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.